Yeah, that's right. Hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon, it is. My name is Tim. I am your truth slinger. Welcome to Wartime Christianity. And I am just a little bit nervous today. I'm a little bit excited because I have someone who has been, someone that's been a mentor to me, right, from afar. And I've been just admiring him, admiring his work, all the things he's been doing here in local Maine. And when I started this podcast, I don't know, a couple of years ago, and now 300 and something episodes in the belt and lots of live streams now, I finally get a chance to sit down and talk with him today. And so I am so totally excited about that. And before this show, right, this great influence in my life has let me know that he's got relatives, right, that live right down a stone's throw down the road from me here in Maine. So I am excited. I don't want to waste any other time. That's why I picked a short intro. I want to welcome to the show my friend Big Steve Robinson from the Maine Wire. How are you today, Steve? Nice to have you in the house. Welcome to the program.
I'm fantastic and getting better every day, Tim. Thank you very much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Oh, well, as I said before, I think you heard that we've been watching your work, and it's just exciting to see someone doing things that are big, and see you like that documentary we went to see, Triad Weed, where I got a chance to speak with you just a little bit. I know it was a busy night for you, but that was fantastic, and it gives people like me, hope that with a small amounts of resources and talented people that gravitate to a passion project like the Truth Slinger Project and all of its products that have come out of it, that we can do big and great things if we dream big and do big. And so I love it. It's been great. I enjoyed that. And now you're on to some a news story that is extremely relevant now that we are 4 days out, 3.5 days out from the election. That we've got some irregularities apparently that you've uncovered here on the Maine rolls, and you made some folks brought it to people's attention, and you're starting to get some, I guess, interest in it. But there's some complications because you don't want to reveal your source. So why don't you tell us about that, and we can talk about potential voter irregularity, because right now this is, I think, an election here for us that is pivotal, to say the least. I'm probably understating it quite a bit.
Yeah, so I mean the story that we broke a couple of weeks ago, I guess the top line message is that non-citizens are registered to vote in the state of Maine, and votes have been cast in their names. We can prove it conclusively based on records that are currently in the custody of the government. These are government records that show irrefutably that non-citizens are registered to vote in Maine elections, and that since 2016, votes have been cast in their name. What we can't tell from the records really is, have they registered themselves to vote, and have they walked into the polls or pulled absentee ballots of their own volition, or is someone doing this on their behalf? So we don't know who is committing these crimes, but we know, as a matter of fact, election crimes have been committed. Non-citizens are registered to vote in Maine elections. Their votes are being counted alongside the votes of U.S. citizens. That's just a fact. And this reporting is based on Medicaid records that were leaked to us. And the importance of the Medicaid records is that they contain enough unique identifiers about an individual that you can match up an individual's Medicaid record with their publicly available voter information from the Secretary of State. So you can take an individual's first name, middle name, last name, their date of birth, and their address, and match it up with that similar information available in the central voter registration system file that the Secretary of State makes available to political parties and some groups who request it. And the Medicaid records also include an indication of alien status. And there are three options for alien status. There's 1, U.S. citizen, 2, legal alien, and 3, other. What our research, what our reporting has shown is that there are 6 individuals who are registered to vote. 3 of them are 2 legal aliens, and 3 of them fall into that third category, other. which is an illegal alien or a paroled illegal alien, sometimes known as an asylum seeker here in the state of Maine. And it's important for people to realize that you can be a legal alien here in Maine on a green card. You can have a lawful permanent residency. You can be following all the rules, working legally, having gone through the legal immigration system, paying taxes, but you're still not allowed to vote unless you have been naturalized. Only naturalized U.S. citizens and U.S. citizens born in the United States or on a military base, but only U.S. citizens and naturalized U.S. citizens are legally allowed to participate in local, state, and federal elections here in the state of Maine. So all 6 of these individuals are illegally registered to vote. And to the extent that they have voted or votes have been cast in their names, each one of those votes was also an illegal act.
Right.
And people may look at this and say, oh, well, it's just 6 individuals. What does that really matter? Well, first of all, we've been told all along, as I'm sure you've heard, Tim.
I was going to ask.
Non-citizens aren't voting. Non-citizens aren't voting. That's what we've heard.
It's already legal not to vote, right? So
exactly.
So the question becomes, well, what are the mechanisms we have to assure that? And that's where the states are weak in the mechanism to check for proper identification or citizenship. But in this case, are we talking about self-declared people like there was in Virginia that were successfully, I guess, held up? The Supreme Court held it up and said, no, you got to take those people off the rolls. It's illegal for them to vote. And we've got the Department of Justice, trying to sue to keep them on. It seems to me it's madness.
Yeah, we're talking about really a mix of individuals, and from the Medicaid records, you can't tell exactly what their legal status is. For example, someone who is a legal alien could be someone who is here under a green card, or it could be someone who is here under a lawful approved refugee status. Someone who is in that third category of other could be an asylum seeker.
Sure.
So that means that they could be an affirmative asylum seeker or a defensive asylum seeker, which is an affirmative asylum seeker is someone who enters the country illegally, maybe at a port of entry or between a port of entry, but the very first occasion they encounter.
We're having
file their claim for asylum.
Yeah.
A defensive. Do we have an issue here?
Just a little bit. I'm hoping it's going to smooth out. Yeah, you locked up just a little bit. Just back up about 10, 20 seconds.
So basically what I was trying to say is that in that third category, you have asylum seekers who have submitted paperwork to the federal government and said, I would like to apply for asylum here in the United States.
Yes.
So we don't know specifically what the unique circumstances of all these individuals are when it comes to their immigration status. But we know based on their Medicaid records that they're not U.S. citizens.
Okay.
We know that they should be ineligible to vote in our elections, yet somehow they're registering to vote and they're being allowed to vote in our elections.
Okay.
And
so answer the question then that you asked yourself, or basically you said, play devil's advocate with yourself is, well, it's not that many people. What's the big deal? Because that's what the left plays all the time. So you got a handful. We're not saying it doesn't occur ever. As a matter of fact, they use it to diffuse our arguments. How would you answer that?
Yeah, so I mean, we've seen these steps play out with argument after argument after argument. It's like, the conspiracy theories go, about 12 months later, they just become settled fact. That's generally the pattern that we've seen really since 2020. So we start out with, it's not happening. You're a conspiracy theorist if you suggest that non-citizen voting is happening. And then now we're at the point where, yeah, it's happening, but it's so small, it's not existent. Eventually, we're going to get to the point where the left here in Maine is going to say, yeah, it's happening and it's a good thing and more of this should be happening. We're not there yet, but trust me, that's where we're headed. But the reason why it's more significant than just the 6 individuals here who we can prove are registered to vote despite not being U.S. citizens is because the full sample size of records that we were able to look at included just 18 non-citizens. So of a sample size of 18 non-citizens, 6 of them were registered to vote. So that works out to a third, or 33%. And I know that for the math nerds out there, will say, well, it's not a random sample size. I understand that, but it's as good a sample size as we're going to be able to get. And if you look at that, you've got a third of them are registered to vote. So if you apply that to the total population of non-citizens who are present in Maine, and our best estimates as to that number come from the NGOs that advocate on behalf of asylum seekers, refugees, and other non-citizens.
Right.
So the Maine Immigrant Rights Coalition estimates that there are somewhere between 70,000 and 100,000 non-citizens present here in the state of Maine. So if you say, okay, based on average demographic information, maybe 70% of that total number are over the age of 18, and then you take and say, okay, well, what if 33% of that population are registered to vote and are voting in Maine elections? You start to get to some really big numbers.
Mm-hmm.
You start to get to some numbers that could possibly sway a second congressional district election.
Sure.
If enough non-citizens are voting in the Lewiston-Auburn area, which we all know is an area where a lot of non-citizens tend to live and tend to congregate.
Yeah.
You certainly are looking at a population big enough to sway some of the legislative districts in southern Maine. If you look at some of these races in Sanford, Maine, you've got state legislative races that are settled by 150, 200, 500 votes. So you're looking at a population of non-citizen voters that could be big enough to sway federal elections, even perhaps even electoral college votes could depend on the non-citizen vote. But we'll never know how large the population of non-citizen voters are unless the Secretary of State and the Mills administration cooperate to do the data analysis necessary to determine how big that population is. And so far, they've shown no interest whatsoever in getting to the root of this problem, or even wrapping their arms around it and figuring out exactly how big of a problem it really is.
Right. Well, that's what I want to ask you next. Before I'd like to interject that, this sounds to me similar to the interview. I don't know, it was Andrea Mitchell or something that was arguing with someone, a congressman, I think, and about, well, it's just a handful of apartment complexes in Aurora, Colorado, huh?
Yeah, with JD
Martha
Vance.
Raddatz.
Yeah,
Yes,
the argument with JD Vance,
Yeah,
which is again, yeah, you're right, Tim.
And it's like this. Well, okay, but wait a minute. You're hearing yourself, and so when you present these to people, I'm really curious because it's like, okay, that's the argument I would make to anyone. We're not supposed to have it happening at all. We've been assured over and over and over by the left it's not happening. So if that's the case, if you present this information, and I'd like you to tell us about who you've talked to about this and what their response has been, but, why aren't they saying, oh, my gosh, you're right, this shouldn't be happening, we'll get right on it?
Yeah, I mean, one species of the response that we've seen, whether it's other members of the media or, election officials, politicians, whatever, is, oh, it's just 5 or 6. It's just a small number that you've been able to prove. But you raise a good point, which is, okay, so how many illegal votes do we worry about? Like, how many illegal votes is reason to change up how the system works? I mean, 500, 5,000. Like, at what point does it become something where it's newsworthy for the other outlets in the state of Maine?
Right,
at what point does
cast doubt upon the election system itself, which is in all of our systems. Are all of our government agencies, the faith, the public trust in them is gone.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess the way I see it, that is, any non-citizen voting, any illegal vote being cast is effectively canceling out the vote of a U.S. citizen who's a legal voter. Yes. And that's disenfranchisement. That takes away their fundamental right, their fundamental democratic right to participate in self-governance and to be in a democracy. So if you have a very large number, say you've got 500 non-citizens who are voting and they all vote in one direction, well, 500 U.S. citizens who voted in the other direction no longer get a vote, no longer get a say.
Yep.
Their votes are effectively canceled out. They're disenfranchised. Their vote is suppressed. So it's an issue that I think gets to the core democratic values that we should have as a society. And the election officials here in the state, like Secretary of State Shenna Bellows, she, runs marathon races wearing a shirt that says "Democracy Defender." She paraded herself around on network news outlets when she was trying to kick Trump off the ballot, talking about the sanctity of democratic values. But here's a case where you have very real voter disenfranchisement happening, but she doesn't seem to be interested in investigating that. She doesn't want to get to the bottom of that. She doesn't even really appear concerned at all about the possibility that you're seeing voters in Maine disenfranchised on her watch.
So basically, you broke the story like last week, a week ago, or a little something like that, and you contacted these offices and presented the fact that you are in possession of information that you have that you can do. And as a matter of fact, the way you did your analysis, they could do the exact same thing with a computer program and check into it because they have access to all the roles and to cross-reference these things. And they're not interested, or they want you to turn over what you have. What's going on there?
So I haven't contacted the Attorney General's office at all, or the Secretary of State's office.
Okay.
They read the report after it was initially published, and Attorney General Aaron Fry and Secretary of State Bellows sent me a letter asking me to turn over all of the records that went into my reporting, the names and identities of the individuals who were illegally registered to vote, and basically any records whatsoever related in any way to the reporting that we had done. This very obviously was a request that would allow them to go fishing for whoever the source was and punish them to the fullest extent of the law, make an example of them so that future sources wouldn't cooperate with the Maine Wire or really any journalistic outfit when they saw wrongdoing happening. This was an attempt to silence this whistleblower as well as future whistleblowers, and I think was a very chilling example of government tyranny, frankly. This was the government stepping in and saying, show us where your sources are hiding. We want to make sure that no one else has access to this information that shows that potentially we're not doing our jobs and we're not protecting the integrity of elections. I corresponded with my attorneys and allowed them to respond on my behalf. And we made it clear that we're not going to cooperate with any endeavor to investigate and out and punish our sources. But in addition to that, it's not just about protecting sources, it's also about protecting the identities of the non-citizens who have somehow become registered to vote. The left has made a concerted effort to cast this reporting and my communication about it as in some way being anti-immigrant, but it couldn't be further from the truth. The system that we have set up right now by Secretary of State Bellows, the system that has been protected and constructed really by the Democrats who control the state legislature, is anti-immigrant. Just to be clear, the system we have right now is dangerous and unfair to immigrants because it makes it too easy for them to accidentally or unwittingly register to vote when they're applying for benefits or when some interpreter or some smiling-faced employee from an NGO comes knocking on the door of their subsidized housing unit. And because the system makes it so easy for them to unwittingly register to vote and commit a deportable offense, an election crime, I didn't feel comfortable giving the Attorney General a list of names of these individuals because in both of the communications that he sent to me, he never suggested that there could have been some other culprit here other than the named individuals, the non-citizens who are registered to vote. He in no way left open the possibility that he would be looking into groups that might have exploited these migrants or taken advantage of them. And based on some details in the records that I haven't published, it really, really appears to me that you're dealing with a group of non-citizens who have been taken advantage of by outside groups.
Well, these aren't. And I'm glad that you said that because, we're not even talking about, and usually the left will say, well, you're just a racist, right? That's where they'll go first. Because it just so happens that the people that are migrants or immigrants that are here happen to be from a country where it's predominantly black. So, they do this all the time, but this isn't even what you're saying. What you're saying here is and I'm surprised because I'm sensing from you that you're not even coming out to say, look, I'm against immigration or any of these things in this way even. You're just saying that these people have somehow found their way on to the rolls, and you're actually demonstrating some empathy for the people that are being taken advantage of potentially. Am I getting that right?
Well, I mean, this is something that I've said from the very beginning, both in my responses to the Attorney General when he's demanding a list of names, and my reporting. There are two reasons not to cooperate with those requests. One is to protect my source, which is a fundamental journalistic value. It's very established, law that journalists are allowed to protect their sources, and that the government shouldn't be demanding that we turn over whomever our sources are, and also to protect a vulnerable population of refugees and asylum seekers who have somehow become registered to vote. And the example I'll give you is based on another report that we filed based on an interview that we did with a 72-year-old Puerto Rican Spanish language interpreter who works in the Portland area. This woman, for a little more than a year, has been working as an interpreter for Spanish-speaking asylum seekers, refugees, migrants, whatever class of immigrant have you. In one instance, she's working with a Venezuelan woman who came across the border illegally in December and somehow found her way to Maine. In September of this year, she files an I-589 document with the federal government, which is a claim for asylum. Federal government takes that, stamps it, sends it back to her, and that's not a legal status or approved permanent status. That's just a receipt that says, okay, we've received your asylum claim, you're in line, we'll get to this. As you know, as everyone knows, the asylum claim system is so backed up that could be 4, 5, 10 years from now,
Yes.
Where this woman is essentially in limbo. However, the I-589 document allows her to go into the welfare office, the Department of Health and Human Services office in Portland, and apply for food stamp benefits, housing, Medicaid, the full slate of benefits that are available to asylum seekers here in the state of Maine. As they're going through this process, the Spanish language interpreter is helping this woman fill out the paperwork, correspond with the welfare clerk, get the benefits. And at the end of that, the welfare clerk, according to the interpreter, hands over voter registration paperwork. And at this point, the interpreter steps in and says, hey, what are you doing? This isn't right. She's illegal. You know she's illegal. She just signed up for benefits with a piece of paperwork that shows definitively that she doesn't have legal status here. You're trying to basically get her to commit a crime that could get her locked up or deported. And so this Venezuelan woman didn't end up registering to vote, but only because her interpreter intervened. Now, take the interpreter who intervened out of that equation and put yourself in the shoes of this Venezuelan woman. She just spent the last year coming up here from Venezuela, a terrible socialist country, hyperinflation, crime is rampant. She goes through the Darien Gap, which is just a terrible, horrible process. She's probably paid her life savings to some coyote to help get her smuggled through. She has 2 children with her, by the way, her 2 sons with her. She may have been sexually assaulted or physically assaulted along the way. And she somehow gets to Maine after going through this wildly traumatic experience that people in the comfort of America or this state probably can't really sympathize with. And she gets to this welfare office and she gets an interpreter who speaks her language. She goes into this office and she knows if she fills out this paperwork, she's going to be able to provide food for her kids, and she's going to get shelter, and she's going to get a roof over her kids' head. So for the first time in 8, 9, 10 months, she's going to have some safety and some security. And all she's going to do is fill out this paperwork. Now, if I'm in her shoes, I'm going to sign every document you put in front of me.
Right.
I don't care what it is. I'm not going to bother reading it. I don't care what language it's in. I'm just going to be signing stuff left and right so that I can take care of my kids.
Yeah. Like when you buy a house, you just sign all the damn papers, right?
Exactly. And so you can easily see in that scenario how a woman or man or any refugee or asylum seeker could accidentally or unwittingly sign voter registration documents, become registered to vote, and thereby commit a deportable offense.
Yeah.
So the reason I bring up this story is that I don't know the circumstances of any of these non-citizens who are registered to vote.
Right.
They could they could have gone through the journey that I just described. I have no idea what their life stories are, whether their refugee claims are legitimate, whether their asylum claims are legitimate. So what what right or what moral prerogative do I have to dime them out to the attorney general, who is basically chomping at the bit to lock them up or throw them out of the country? I have no idea how they came to be registered to vote,
Yeah.
or who might be harvesting ballots in their name.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to turn over to the attorney general a list of names of people who could be victims of identity theft or victims of a system that makes it way too easy for non-citizens to inadvertently become registered to vote.
Sure. Well, I'm getting a lot of interesting stuff going on in the chat, and I'm going to probably address a little bit of it, but I guess I want to push back a little bit in the fact that I think there's a general sentiment in this country that says, I mean, after like you just said, a list of benefits these folks get, right, that American citizens in some cases are not getting, and in some cases, I'm trying to cover the homeless, crisis that it's been exacerbated by this migrant crisis. But I guess what I do appreciate is the fact that you take a viewpoint of, hey, these are what the current rules are now. This is what everybody is operating under at the moment. This is what the voters that voted in people that created policy, that created this mess. And it is a mess. But there are individual human beings within that mess, right? And I think that you've done a good job in highlighting that, to say that, they may not have any nefarious intentions, or they may be just economic migrants, but that's to be determined yet in the future at some point. So there has to be some sort of, consideration of those people as people, right? And I don't assume that folks that are here, I think they want to do the right thing. I think they want to do good things, but I think they've been drawn here because of our magnetized policies. Phil Valentine used to say years ago, we used to listen to him in Tennessee before he died of the COVID thing. But, we got to turn off the magnet. And not only do we have a magnet, but we've opened the floodgates, and they are being used, I think, by the left and forces outside of themselves to be utilized to sway the election. And if there is any information that you have, they should be saying, okay, well, wow, this has happened, and they hear this reporting, we should go look into it. But it is an intimidation tactic to come and say, well, you give us that information. It's like, well, we got the information, and these are records that are available to you, the government. And, you can't give up the sources, and you can't give up those folks. And so, yeah, it's hard. It's like between being a rock and a hard place. And I think that the position that we've all been placed in is that, to a certain degree, we've become more racist as a country, or more whatever it is that they want us to be. But I think it's all in the spirit of division, and I think it's in the spirit of holding power. And so, especially in this particular election, I think that it's just going to make a mess later, because, people are paying attention to what's going on here. People are watching what's going on, and they're doing things out in the open now that that they used to do in the dark. And like you said, and it's that slippery slope that we always go toward. And we're always proven right in the end. Sooner or later, they're going to be advocating, well, they're an important part of the community. They should be voting on local issues and this, that, and the other thing, and da-da-da-da-da-da. But yet, we've brought in an entire different culture, potentially, that doesn't necessarily always understand or believe in the Constitution either. Like you said, you got folks that aren't even speaking the language, and they're signing papers because they want a good life for themselves, which is virtuous and wonderful. And, Sidewalk Scriptures, a friend of mine who lives just down the road, is saying that his wife gets nothing and we have followed the law. They won't approve her for anything. right? As far as, I guess, benefits, this, that, and the other thing. And I've got another friend who you're going to be with, Chuck Ellis, on Monday. I'm sure that's going to be an interesting conversation because his wife is from Kenya. And he's going to Kenya right after this interview, and he's going to spend the holidays there. And hopefully, well, if he wins the election, he might have to come back for a minute. But she's waiting in line for long, long, long periods of time. But yet there are people here enjoying the status here. And so there's a resentment that's been created. And culturally speaking, it's not just the election thing. It's altered our way of life, and not in a way that I'm saying we're scared or xenophobic or anything like that. It's just disruptive when you bring people in this quickly, this fast, in order to achieve a political objective.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of what you said that I would agree with. I think but those are kind of separate conversations from
Yes.
our election rules and whether or not non-citizens are registered to vote, and then what you do about it. If we know, as we do now, that non-citizens are registered to vote in Maine and that votes are being cast in their names, what do you do based on that information? What does the coming legislative session do? What do the future constitutional officers, the new Attorney General and new Secretary of State after December, what do they do about it? That's one conversation, but the other is the prioritization of the allocation of benefits within our social safety net system. And that's a big conversation that I think the records that we have also bear on, because the records don't just include the alien statuses of some of these individuals. They also show the tremendous amount of money that's being spent in many cases on healthcare for these individuals. And it's all coming from taxpayer money. And something to understand about the way Medicaid works here in the state of Maine is that the non-citizen populations aren't covered by federal benefits in most cases. So the reason why the state Maine care system is keeping track of the alien status is for really an accounting issue. If it's a legal alien or a non-citizen, it gets billed differently than if it's a U.S. citizen. So the asylum seeker population, the paroled illegal aliens who are being provided with Medicaid coverage or Maine care coverage, that all comes directly from the general fund. So there's a very real tension between the amount of money that's being spent on healthcare for non-citizens versus the healthcare that dollars that could potentially be spent on U.S. citizens. And you also have a lot of nonprofits or NGOs that have been set up and have the ability to bill Medicaid. And I think that there are some questions about the integrity of those NGOs and whether the bills that they're submitting, the claims for reimbursement that they're submitting to the state are entirely on the level. And I think there's also some very legitimate questions about whether the Department of Health and Human Services is honestly auditing those claims and then treating those NGOs as if they were, say, run by lifelong Mainers. There's a little bit of favoritism within our system, I think, that's being shown for Southern Maine nonprofits and the so-called new Mainer population. And if there's, been, I don't know that there's been a growth of racism in the country, but I think that there's been a revealing of the efforts on the left to stoke those tensions and to use that and to manipulate that and to sow division in order to grow their own political power.
Yes.
And when it comes to non-citizens present here in the state of Maine, I actually, and I know that this is probably a controversial position and not something that most conservatives would support, but I actually think that the asylum seekers, the ones who are following the laws as we have them written, who have submitted their paperwork and they are trying to become refugees or asylum seekers, and they're here at least with a paroled status or a temporary legal status, I think that they should be able to participate in local elections, especially if they have kids in schools. Like if you're a mother and a father, a family unit, and you're here living in Westbrook or something, and you have 3 or 4 kids that are attending the local school, I think you should be able to have a say in who the school board members are.
Right.
I don't know how exactly you would administer
Well,
those elections, if it would be a separate election. I know that that would create a mess if you have them voting in local elections or state elections, but not in federal elections, because that would require changes at the federal level.
yeah.
But it seems to me that if you've got kids who are in a school system spending, 6 to 8 hours a day in this school system, you should have some say in how that, government unit is administered.
Right.
And I
Right.
think that people would find out very quickly that the population of asylum seekers who have arrived in the last 5 years to Maine from the Democratic Republic of Congo and from Angola, they don't they don't share the values that the New York liberals or the Boston liberals do. They don't share the values that the Maine Democrats do, and even the population of Somali Americans, refugees, asylum seekers who have a little bit longer of a history in the state of Maine, in mostly the Lewiston Auburn area, but also in Portland, they also don't have the same kind of values that the Maine Democrats do. So I think that there's a potential for a political realignment in the state of Maine if conservatives are willing to at least reach out and get to know some of these people. Just go to church, go to a Congolese or Angolan church service, and you will very quickly realize that the conservatives of Somerset County, Piscataquis County, and Penobscot County have much, much more in common with Angolan and Congolese asylum seekers than they do with the rich limousine liberals who escaped Boston or New York and bought up houses in Maine during COVID.
Well, let me push back just a little bit here.
Of course.
These people have been let in under a policy, but this policy may very well be illegal because parole is supposed to be on an individual basis. But if the parole system has been abused and allowed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people through that system, or paroled in blocks of people, then we've got a situation where it's illegal. They're here illegally. The Democrats made a policy and allowed it to happen. And I may have compassion that they are here and they came in under a time where they thought it was legal. But how do we undo that mess? How do we put this genie back in the bottle? Because I know this is one of those things where Donald Trump, who I have voted for already, is talking about mass deportations. And I think in practicality, that's going to be like getting Mexico to pay for the wall. Okay, I'm not quite sure we're going to get there with that. But trying to put a humane lens on it, as you are, which I appreciate a great deal, I have to, again, push back because my chat's kind of buzzing over here saying, yeah, get them out if they're not supposed to be here, and then let them get back in line along with everyone else that is supposed to be here legally. And with the point of, if somebody's here on a green card and they've been living here and they're here for 10 years and they're working here and doing this and the other things, and they have a kid in school, all that kind of stuff, that's fine. But we've created this separate class, a super class of people, of line jumpers, right? And it was because of policy. What happens if the policy is deemed to be it was illegally done and it needs to be reversed? What do we do with that?
Well, I mean, if the bill is reversed, it doesn't necessarily affect people who, were operating legally under a previous set of laws. I mean, there's no bill of attainder. It's not like if if suddenly you make podcasting illegal, it's not like everyone who previously did a podcast is somehow a criminal. So the individuals that we're talking about are mostly just operating within a system that has been created. And I'm not defending that system at all. I mean, our immigration system is totally broken. It doesn't make any sense. It's not fair to legal immigrants. It's not fair to green card holders. It's not really fair to anyone who's trying to play by the rules. The only way our immigration system makes sense right now is if you're a very large corporation that is looking for an unethical source of cheap labor, or if you're a political organization that's looking to grow your own political power by importing a new class of voters, or importing enough people so that the next time the census counts happens, you can reshape congressional districts in a way that you benefit from. So nothing that I said should be construed as defending the current immigration system. I think that the restrictions should be tightened up pretty severely, but I think you need to be careful in separating criticism of the system as it's being exploited, as opposed to those people who are saying, here are the rules, I'm going to operate under those rules.
Yeah.
If somebody has come here and lodged a defensive asylum claim and then committed crimes, they should be deported.
Right.
And that is that they because they're not following the rules.
Right. If
someone came here and lied on their asylum claim, they should be deported. That is a bogus asylum claim. Like, to be clear, there are a very narrow set of reasons why someone is allowed to make a claim of asylum, and simply wanting a better job, wanting to improve your life. Those aren't legitimate reasons for asylum. Those are bogus reasons. You're not allowed to be an economic migrant and claim asylum. That's just not the case. So when individuals haven't followed the law, then they should be deported, and there do need to be changes to, at the very least, clarify how our immigration system is going to work. Because right now, if you look at the backlog of asylum claims, it's exploded. It's crazy. It's just not, there's no, it almost looks like a chart of the US federal debt. If you look at the asylum claim backlog, it's not that we just don't have the human administrative capacity to deal with a number of asylum claims. So it's either going to break, which I think it already has broken. I think we're living through the breaking of that system, or there needs to be some kind of a dramatic overhaul that allows us to plug the hole in the boat and then figure out what exactly to do with all the water we've taken on board. But like specifically here in Maine, I would say that a compassionate response from conservatives, I think, would serve them well, because from the conversations that I've had with the Angolan and Congolese migrants who have come to Maine, they are not happy with what's happening in schools. Like, they do not like the men being allowed to participate in women's sports. They don't like the left-wing curriculum that's being shoved down their kids' throats. And these parents are having the same exact conversations that are happening in Dexter and Ellsworth and Farmington, where kids come home from school and mom and dad have to sit them down and say, hey, I know you may have learned about Ralphie, the two-spirit unicorn, but here's what we believe as a family, and here's what the truth is. The asylum seeker families are having that conversation too, and they would be speaking out, and they would be going to school board meetings, and they would be standing side by side with the guys wearing MAGA hats complaining about left-wing indoctrination in our school system, except they're afraid. They're legitimately afraid that if they step out of line and criticize the progressive narrative, that this state, or maybe even progressives at the federal level, are going to step in and mess with their asylum claims. These people should not be living under the threat of government tyranny any more than U.S. citizens who go to school board meetings, voice their complaints, and then end up getting investigated by the FBI, as we've seen here and in Virginia.
Well, it's not all so fair. I'm sure you've heard the story of Heather. We've had her on the program in Lewiston, where we have a large Somalian population. And I have to just point out and push back a little bit again that we're talking about separate cultures. There might be a great deal of overlap between some of the values, but it is not identical. The cultures are not the same. And there is an exploitation that's going on of everyone involved, because the system isn't serving any of us very well, neither the immigrants nor us, because of the indoctrination. But it's all kludged up with this giant, you mentioned NGOs. That's a whole nother can of worms. Oh my God. That do all sorts of things. And the system is like, just got sycophantic, vampires all over it, sucking off the public teat, okay? And exploiting these people, exploiting us, using public funds. And it reminds me of, and I think we're getting dangerously close to the point in the Cloward-Piven strategy where simply the welfare system becomes completely overwhelmed and it collapses. And once it collapses, the people that are on that particular system who got used to, getting the fed from that system, when that collapses, will rise up, and then it's going to make, it's going to usher in the new change. So it's that whole idea of you can bring down an entire civilization or empire by just, simply having it fall from within with a burden on the welfare state. And I see a lot of that going on. I think we're desperately close to that. So, what do you think?
Well, I think that the you're kind of dealing with two separate immigration related issues here. The first is the groups of asylum seekers who have come predominantly from Angola and the Democratic Republic of Congo, sub-Saharan Africa, really since 2018, 2019. And they're in a little bit different of a circumstance than the Somalis who began arriving really under the Baldacci administration after Governor Baldacci declared that Maine was a sanctuary state. So you're kind of dealing with two different populations here. And what you're starting, it's been happening for so long now that a lot of these individuals are U.S. citizens. I mean, they were born in the United States.
Right.
And so, their parents may have been asylum seekers or refugees or have some various kind of immigration status, but the kids now are U.S. citizens, and I think that they're entitled to the full benefits and protections of U.S. citizens. We have, if you're born in the United States, you are a U.S. citizen, and and until I know there's been some conversation about changing those rules, but those rules haven't been changed, and I don't think they're likely to be changed.
Mm-hmm.
And so they should be treated just like you would expect to be treated yourself as a U.S. citizen.
Sure.
And I think that some of the issues that you see with, I guess, the clash of cultures, whether it's in the Lewiston, Auburn area or other parts of the country, is it's a very complicated, complex situation. But I don't think that conservatives in the state of Maine have done themselves any favors trying to reach out and do, I guess, melting pot integration on their own part.
Right.
I don't know how closely you were following Governor LePage's campaigns, and I love Governor LePage, but the two campaigns that he ran heavily relied on advertising that scapegoated illegal aliens or refugees or asylum seekers, or there are so many different kinds of migrant status, whether it's legal or illegal. So it's tempting to oversimplify the language and not make the point you're trying to make. So,
right.
But the group of people who they scapegoated with their advertising, you could say that some of the Somali Americans, including natural-born U.S. citizens, were included in that category. And so if they see for 10 years or twice in an 8-year period, advertising that is making them out to be the boogeyman, they're probably going to develop some antipathy for Republicans generally. And I think that that's entirely justified. Like, if you see Republicans running advertising saying that you don't belong in Maine and you're just here for welfare, yada, yada. Like, yeah, you're probably not going to like Republicans. So I think that the Republicans have some work to do. Conservatives have some work to do. And even just like conservative Democrats from Northern Maine, generally people who haven't ever, gone into a community that has some asylum seekers, refugees, migrants, whatever, and tried to meet these people and offered at least an open hand, should be willing to do that before they draw any sharp conclusions about, the effect that these individuals are having on our community, generally speaking.
Right.
So that's what I would say, is that conservatives need to make an effort to do the melting pot aspect thing that they always talk about on their own end.
Yeah,
because it's not just entirely incumbent upon a new population of refugees that arrives in a state to integrate on their own and the Democrats and the NGO blob and the left-wing progressives and some of the parts of the state that have just been permanently controlled by left-wing progressives, they've done a very good job at reaching out to these populations and establishing themselves as gatekeepers and effectively being the people who control what the community says.
Right.
I was talking with somebody the other day about really this specific issue, and they said something about how they were trying to arrange a meeting with the leader of the Somalis in Lewiston. And I was like, well, who is that? Who is the leader of the Somalis in Lewiston? That's
The
like
chief.
saying like, yeah, that's like saying, I'm going to go up to a rustic county and I'm going to find a leader of the French Canadians, or I'm going to find a leader of the Catholics in a rustic county. And so there's this kind of like silly oversimplified view,
Yeah.
a monolithic view
Yeah.
of these cultures, because there hasn't been a lot of attempts at integration. And the biggest barrier there, I think, is the language barrier. It's really hard to integrate and to have these conversations if you have that language barrier. So I would think that, if I was sitting down to figure out a way how to make for the most harmonious integration of these disparate cultures, I would focus number one on overcoming that language barrier.
Right.
And, rather than spending, 50 million or $100 million teaching all of our public school students what every color on the Pride Progress flag means, I would be teaching them English. Because as soon as everyone can speak the same language and can communicate, we can start talking about the things that we have in common and our shared vision for what the state can be. I would focus on overcoming that language barrier as quickly as possible for kids, for adults, for everybody.
Right. Right. Well, I agree with some of what you say, and I don't agree with some of what you say, and my chat is all over the place. But there is pushback in the chat as well, and I think what I would just say is what I said earlier. Right? If legally speaking, we found that things were done improperly, I've asked the question, hypothetically speaking, what if we found out that there was actually a theft of the election in 2020? Then, we knew it. It was provable without a shadow of a doubt. That would make everything that was signed during the entire administration, all those laws would be null and void because of the fraud. I guess it would be a constitutional crisis. So I don't know how that's going to work out, shake itself out when and if, hopefully, Donald Trump gets elected, because I think that's the only sane position to take. And then at some point, there's going to have to be some sort of sane, well-balanced approach to doing this. For example, obviously, criminal, illegal aliens or people that commit crimes, they're going to need to go first. And then we're going to have to figure out, what and how to adjudicate things more quickly, perhaps, right?
I think that there needs to be significant changes made to the immigration system, and it needs to be made much more efficient. I think President Trump's Remain in Mexico policy was a smart one, allowing asylum claims to be adjudicated on an expedited basis without allowing people to gain entry into the United States.
Right.
It just makes a lot of sense, because the system as it works right now, asylum claims generally, before Biden, it was like, I think somewhere between 70 and 80% of asylum claims were rejected.
Well, yeah, and
under Biden, I think it's more like 50% or something.
Yeah.
But in any event, it's a very slow process now. But if you so you come to Maine and you file your asylum claim and you get your I-589 back, and you're just in line waiting. So you might get your decision back in 4 years or 5 years. In the meantime, maybe you've had kids, or the kids you brought with you are enrolled in the school system. You're learning the language. After you've been here for 6 months, you get a card with a 9-digit unique identifier, which is the equivalent of a social security number that allows you to work. So you're working, you're a little bit integrated into the community, and then your decision comes back and says, no, your asylum claim is denied. It's not like somebody shows you up and picks you up and puts you on a bus or a plane and deports you. You're expected to self-deport. And I don't know exactly what the numbers on self-deportation are, but I'm willing to bet that the numbers of self-deportation aren't very high.
Yeah.
And I can just say for myself, if I had come from a country that was less blessed than America, and I was in that situation, and I've been here for 5 years, and my kids were in school, and then they denied my asylum claim, I probably wouldn't self-deport. I would hang out and I would find some way to kind of live in this gray area. So I don't fault at all anyone who is in that circumstance. So I think what you have to do is move to the Remain in Mexico policy that Trump implemented, which said you can file your asylum claim at the border, but you're not going to come into the United States and get yourself into this situation where you're here for 4 years, you put roots down, your kids are in the school system, and then you're expected to self-deport. Like, let's preempt that scenario by adjudicating these asylum claims at the border, so that one, legitimate asylees or legitimate asylum claims still have the benefit of being able to seek asylum in the United States, but also people who are fraudulently making those claims don't get to continue to perpetrate that fraud long after their claim has been rejected. And if you set up that system, by the way, you diminish the incentive for people to come here with bogus asylum claims. Like, once people learn that they don't just get into the United States no matter what and get to hang out while the claim is pending, they're going to be less likely to make the perilous journey to the border to come into the United States, because they're going to know it's less likely that they get in.
Yeah, my opinion is there should be nobody here and nobody in this country enjoying the rights, benefits, privileges, all that stuff of this club that we are all members of, without having an adjudicated claim. Okay, they shouldn't be here. They shouldn't be paroled into the United States waiting adjudication. And it's made a mess, and unmaking it is going to be difficult. And I do take your point that we should be as compassionate as we can, okay, as Republicans. And I do want to go out to these communities. We've got some equipment we've got a hold of now that's going to allow us to go out in the field. I want to go to Lewiston. I want to go to Bangor. I want to go to these different places. And I want to talk and continue to investigate and do a deeper dive that other, the legacy media, the local stations, they're not going to do. And you've got yours handful with a bunch of stuff, so I'm going to go do my own thing, and we're going to go talk to some of these people. And I think that we need to do it compassionately and work within the mess of rules that was set up, but also do as much as we can from a federal level to undo what we can, then to stop what's currently happening, and then whatever's left. Okay, that's where all the compassion and the building the bridges and doing all that stuff needs to happen to get some unity going back in our country, because we're terribly divided right now, and I think we're sitting on a powder keg, and I'm just waiting for it every morning. I get up and for it to go off, and it's because of all of these different forces that are coming together, these sycophantic forces, whether they're making money off of things or people are seeking power, which I think are the two biggest motivating, driving factors here.
Definitely, the growing political power and earning money ultimately are the motivations behind these. But I also think, I guess so. There's a push here and there's a pull here, and we touched on it a little bit. The pull is the lure of an attractive benefit system. If you set up a system where you can show up, apply for asylum, and a day later you're eligible for this panoply of benefits, that's going to be an attractive system. Like, if you establish a system in Maine where our Maine care system is going to cover hip replacements and very expensive surgeries and long-term, lifelong medical care for people who are developmentally disabled or who require significant healthcare expenditures, you're going to cause those people to come here. Like, eventually, we have chat apps now. Like, these people are texting back and forth.
Yes,
they know, word gets out. If anyone in the world can come to Maine and get a free hip surgery, eventually word's going to get to grandma in Mogadishu that she can come to Maine, and if she does the right paperwork, she's going to be able to get a free hip surgery. And I've even heard anecdotally of some people who come to Maine, they go through that process, they get their free surgery on Maine Care, and then they go back to the country that they came from. So if you set up a system that creates this lure of free benefits, yes, people are going to take advantage of it. It's human nature.
Right.
You're creating an incentive system that rational economic actors are going to operate within, to the detriment of other people in the state who are trying to play by the rules. And I think that the state of Maine in particular, and the United States more broadly, exists to protect the citizens within it. Like the purpose of the state of Maine should be to protect the residents and citizens of Maine, whether that's securing law and order or providing a social safety net. So the citizens of Maine should be prioritized ahead of anybody else when it comes to Maine care or state administered benefit programs or law and order. Definitely. That's not happening right now. And because we live in a reality where resources are scarce, the dollars, the healthcare dollars that are instead spent on asylum seekers who have come here to take advantage of an easy benefits system, those are spent at the expense of grandmas and grandpas in northern Maine who are having trouble finding nursing home beds.
Yeah,
and that's just the reality of it.
Yeah.
So you have to tighten up the benefits process so that the pull isn't there, that the incentive isn't there, but you're also dealing, I think, with a push. And this is more of an international thing, where I think you have NGOs that are operating outside of the United States, maybe in partnership with some groups in the United States that are encouraging the flow of migrants, asylum seekers, refugees, and even foreign intelligence operatives from places like the People's Republic of China or other countries, or Jordanian nationals, people who have bad intentions once they get inside the United States. I think you have other groups who are encouraging this migration into the United States because they know that it destabilizes us.
Mm-hmm.
The Cloward and Piven strategy doesn't just have to be something that socialists in elected office or in the federal bureaucracy bring into existence. The Cloward and Piven strategy can also be something that foreign actors, opposition, people who don't want the United States to thrive and succeed, can exacerbate and advance and encourage. So I think it's very, very obvious that third parties, other countries, other groups are pushing migrants into the United States to the detriment of the United States. And the United States needs to start looking at Mexico not as a foreign country, but as a territory controlled by a narco-terrorist group. Mm-hmm. It's a de facto failed state.
Yep.
Mexico City is awesome. I've been to Mexico City. It's awesome. Nice restaurants. I love it. But generally speaking, the territory on the south of Texas is a failed narco state controlled by the Sinaloa cartel, among others. And they have nothing good planned whatsoever for the United States. And they're working in very close coordination with the Chinese Communist Party to bring about very, very bad things for the United States. So you've got to be able to confront that push factor, which means the wall, tighter border security, more agents deployed on the southern border, the Remain in Mexico policy. Basically, you have to re-implement all the executive orders Trump passed and then Biden repealed within his first week of office. But then you've also got to take care of the pull, which is the easy benefit system, which draws migrants, asylum seekers, refugees to go to those jurisdictions where they know that they're going to have an easy time getting benefits.
Yeah, well, that's a very good way. Is that I think that to summarize it, is there are these two: the push, the pull, and that pull I think is going to be more probably accomplished at the local level, right, in state politics, I would think, than the federal. And then, of course, the push. I think that's where the federal government hopefully is going to be able to erect some. And create. The left drives me crazy because they've been using this whole thing, this immigration bill that Donald Trump, poo-poo cock-out on, and it was a wonderful bipartisan bill. We're going to have our most secure border ever. But when you hire Border Patrol agents to be basically welcome station people, and the concierge and the guy who carries your luggage, and then we need some more babysitters. I mean, essentially, that's what they're using a lot of these funds for, and just amping up the process of flowing people in even faster. That's what they want the adjudication judges down there for, is to increase the flow. So we don't talk the same language. Comprehensive immigration reform said by you or I compared to Nancy Pelosi or AOC saying comprehensive immigration reform or Janet Mills is completely different, terms. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, yeah. I mean, this is a battle that's been fought for a long time. I mean, you go back to some of the progressive philosophers like Richard Rorty understood word games and that language is power. And if you can set the terms, if you can define the words and the language that's being used to have these conversations, there's a tremendous amount of power that you can secure there. So.
Yeah.
I would tend to agree that comprehensive immigration reform is a word that I am skeptical of.
Yeah.
And I also, just generally, I don't think that the Congress needs to be passing everything in 1,000, 2,000 page omnibus bills.
No.
I get the political reality of having to, do some congressional log rolling and, coming to compromises and whatnot. But I think the American people generally would benefit from having smaller bills, more narrow issues, and also just more public debate. I mean, the United States Senate, the House of Representatives, they were supposed to be some of the greatest deliberative bodies in the history of mankind. But, when was the last time you actually saw some spirited debate happening on the House floor?
Yeah.
I actually, there's not very much about the United Kingdom that I think we should emulate, but I do like the way their parliamentary system is set up where they're actually having debates going back and forth.
Yes.
Because I think it's transparent. It's also, it's really funny. Nobody can level an insult like a Brit can.
Oh, no.
But, I think that we would benefit from having a more transparent legislative process that had smaller bills that were maybe a little easier for the average person to comprehend.
Right.
And also, I think that there's a tendency to just focus on what's happening on the southern border, but from the law enforcement sources that I have communicated with, and from people in northern Maine that I've communicated with, Maine's border with Canada is a tremendous vulnerability for the United States. And there's some things that I can't talk about because I haven't reached a level where I'm confident in reporting on them publicly. But there are some very, very dangerous people who are trying to cross into the United States from Canada into Maine. And it's a gaping weakness for the United States. And in probably more of a vulnerability than some parts of Texas, Arizona, or California. And right now, I think Customs and Border Protection is getting ready to spend, I don't even know how many tens of millions of dollars. I think it's like $80 million they're spending on the western port of entry with Canada to revitalize this border crossing that I went through a couple months ago. It seemed fine to me, but they're going to be revitalizing it so that it's more climate friendly or something. What we really need to be focusing on is the level of enforcement that we have between ports of entry, because the people who want to do nasty things in the United States, the people who are planning, for example, terrorist attacks or attacks on our electric grid, they know where the ports of entry are. And they're not crossing at the ports of entry. They're crossing between the ports of entry.
You mean they don't want to go meet the policemen at the border and try and convince them that they're all right? Yeah, no, we're gonna be having a.
I mean, it's shocking. It's shocking. I know, but we're terrorists and criminals don't want to go right through the area where they know they're going to have to hand their ID to federal law enforcement.
Yeah, that always cracks me up when the left talks about, well, we're going to get more. All the fentanyl comes across through the southern border. It comes across through the state. So we just need to get better sniffing equipment. It's like, nah, we're going to be having, you segued perfectly into after November 5th. I don't know exactly, but we're going to have a northern Canadian and American Border Patrol agent, I guess Vermont, who is got some things to tell us that are pretty disturbing, right? I haven't talked to him yet. I've just been texting with him. So, I can't wait to sleep better at night after having a chat with Zach in a couple of weeks. He spent some time talking. He was in the documentary with James O'Keefe that James O'Keefe just recently made. So we're going to get him on Wartime Christianity. So TNN is pretty excited. We're starting to get some guests on here that matter and stimulate conversation and make us think. And I think you challenged me today. I know you challenged my chat. And again, we're living in a time now where, again, I just have to echo that people are just on edge and people are angry that, that people are getting put in front of American citizens, whether it's veterans or homeless people or, anybody, okay, like me. I need my hips replaced, So when you said that, I'm like, yeah, well, hey, I'd rather get my hips replaced. I mean, before everybody else, that's coming here that doesn't enjoy the same benefits of the club that we belong to. But Steve, I really appreciate you spending a little over an hour and a half with me, man. It was great. I really enjoy the work you're doing out there. I encourage you to keep at it. Keep me updated on any stuff. We follow you. What else do you have in the works, or is this pretty much what you got going on now? You're working this story.
Well, we've got some long-term investigations that we're working on, and the underlying records that we used for the reporting to prove that non-citizens are registered to vote in the state of Maine also contain some interesting tidbits about the nonprofit blob. That I think is spending a lot of taxpayer resources in a way that doesn't prioritize, the lifelong residents of Maine, U.S. citizens, taxpayers. So we'll continue to report on some of the things that I think are important and matter to the people of Maine. I think we've got the three branches of government here: the governor, the legislature, and the judiciary. But we also have two more branches of government. We've got the fourth branch, which is the executive branch employees, lifelong state workers. A lot of them are very good people, but they also have a tremendous outsized influence on the administration of government in this state, and they're not elected. And thanks to the power of the union, they're largely unaccountable and pretty much can't be fired. And people don't know who they are, despite the fact that they wield tremendous control over how government acts and operates here in the state of Maine. And then you have the fifth branch of government, which is the nonprofit industrial complex, which is, for the most part, totally funded by taxpayers, whether it's Catholic Charities of Maine, which is a migrant resettlement operation that's moving migrants into Bangor, into Portland. But they're just one example. There are hundreds and hundreds of nonprofits that receive probably more than $1 billion in taxpayer dollars to administer government prerogatives, government programs, and they're not covered under the Freedom of Access Act. There's not a lot of transparency. There's not a lot of accountability in those organizations. And so the fourth and fifth branch of government would seem, worth quite a bit of attention from any newsroom that would want to inform the people of Maine about what's happening in the state. So we'll continue to look into that. We've got some longer term investigations that we have, and people can follow it all at themainewire.com. And also, I would encourage people to follow us on social media. I mean, we're getting pretty heavily throttled on Facebook right now, which is not a surprise. But
we heard that.
If people just search for The Maine Wire or go to facebook.com/The Maine Wire, they can find us there. We're on X, which remains, censorship resistant for the time being, also at The Maine Wire there. And we're on Instagram as well. So social media is a great way to follow what we're doing. There's a lot of stuff that we actually publish on social media that doesn't eventually make its way, into a full story, especially video of, progressives saying stupid things in legislative hearings or at city council meetings. So yeah. I think it's an entertaining and informative feed for people. And of course, people can sign up for our email list at themainewire.com. If you scroll down, there's a little box on the right-hand side where you can put your email in there. And that's probably one of the best ways to stay in touch with us. And of course, people can email me, robinson@themainewire.com. It's all over the website. I should be very, very easy to get in touch with. And you can send us, I think it's tips@themainewire.com. If you've got a news story you want us to investigate too, but it should be very, very easy to get into contact with, Tim. And thank you very much for having me on to do this. And if you, if anyone reaches out to you and wants to talk with me, feel free to pass along my contact information. And I appreciate what you're doing here. I think independent media, I think, is the future of media. And I think that, it's not going to take very long. It could be 4, 5, 6 years. The legacy media that has grown so lazy and so incurious in this state are going to look around and they're going to say, hold on a second, why are so many people going to TruthSlinger and the Maine Wire to get information about this? We're the people. We're the trusted authority on what the news should be. So I think we've got there's a bright future ahead for people who have curiosity, energy, and a little bit of motivation in the new independent media space. And forums like X have made it very easy to get past the gatekeepers and to do something like what you're doing with your show. And I love your set, by the way.
Thanks, man.
My set is drab and low energy compared to yours.
It's just my cabin, man. I just threw a couple of things up on the wall, man. It's my bathroom door, man. That's all. I'm just sitting in front of the John. I used to be in the John when I started, and I used to joke and say that I had a bathroom that was adjoining my studio. Actually, my studio was kind of in the bathroom, and that didn't work out too well. So now we're out here in the nice vaulted ceilings in my cabin in central Maine. So, but thanks. I appreciate the compliment. So I look forward to working with you over the coming years because we're not going anywhere, right? TNN's not going anywhere. We, I smoked a little bit of sativa and in a weekend set up an entire news network, right? And we got equipment now and God's working and bringing things. And now our biggest challenge is funding. That's one of those things. But we'll get there. It's self-funded at the moment and funded by viewers like you. So if you'd like to contribute to us, we do have a tip button on the X feed. So Steve, again, thank you. I really appreciate it. It was a really stimulating conversation. You challenged me a little bit about some things, to think about some things. You may have changed some minds. You may have not changed some minds about some things, but that's the way it goes. We just need to keep having conversations. So thank you again. And we'll have you back on, I'm sure, in the future, okay?
Of course. We'd love to do it. Thanks, Tim.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Bye-bye.